What is up, DMV Hoops fans? Welcome to another episode of Believe in DMV Hoops. I am not Matt Moderno. I am your intern for the spring, Jonas Evans. I'll get to my guests in a sec. But to start, as always, we are presented by BetOnline. BetOnline continues to be your number one source for all your basketball wagering needs, including pro and college hoops throughout the year. With up-to-minute odds, stats, and trends, you can follow your favorite teams past the playoffs with in-game live betting, contests, and all your best player props. Experience the world's best wagering platform anytime from your desktop or your mobile device. Head to BetOnline today to become part of the team. And remember to use promo code BELIEVE for your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. BetOnline, the game starts here. So we have a very special episode. It is me, Jonas Evans. I am the intern for the spring, was on one time, and I have my two very informed University of Maryland journalism major partners, Nathan Schwartz and Brandon Schwartzberg, with me. Thank you so much for joining me, gentlemen.
Thanks for having me on. I'm excited. I can't say it's a first time doing a live podcast, but I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, same as Brandon said. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, you two were very intimidated by the live aspect of this, so I guess we'll see how.
No,
it goes.
I think it was more Nate that was intimidated.
Yeah, we'll see how this goes. We'll see how this goes.
Also, be sure to follow us on Twitter and YouTube. It is Believe in Wizards on both. Like and subscribe. We're trying to get those numbers up. All right, so this is a podcast talking all things Maryland men's basketball. The Big 10 tournament is coming up. The regular season is about to end on Sunday, right? On Sunday for the Penn State game?
Yep.
And so we're just going to recap everything. I'm going to start with this, guys. Let's start with a quick recap of just your opinions on this season, because I think the expectations were significantly higher than what we saw. It's been somewhat of a disappointing year for the Terps. So how would you recap it?
Yeah, you kind of could tell early from the very first few games of the season that this team was not the same team as last year. I mean, the losses to Davidson and UAB early on, really like, whoa, what is wrong with this team? Are they going to be able to get it together as the season goes on? And they just haven't been able to do it at all. I mean, they've been one of the bottom teams in Big 10 play pretty much the entire year. I think it's just been a disappointment from start to finish. And I mean, we know that their only shot at making the NCAA tournament is a miracle run through the Big 10 tournament. And I don't think that's going to happen. And I think it's a disappointment in year two under Kevin Willard, especially because they made the tournament last year in his first year.
Yeah, I think the only way to describe it really is disappointing, as what Brandon said. Underwhelming, another word you could potentially use. I look back to that Villanova game on a Friday night after the Davidson and the UAB losses, and Maryland got throttled in that game on the road, and it really set the tone for how the rest of the season was going to go. And even though they hit their stride there in non-conference play in the month of December, once conference play started in January, things just went downhill fast. And of course, the team had good moments here and there. The Nebraska win at the Xfinity Center, notably one of them. But to have Jameer Young back, to have Dante Scott back, to have this great class of freshmen come in, and Deshaun Harris-Smith, Jamie Kaiser Jr., Jonathan Lamoth, and to go into the final game of the regular season sub 500, that's not where this program wants or needs to be at this point.
Yeah, and just for reference for that conference play, they are tied for second to last in the Big 10 right now at 7-12 in conference records. So it, like you guys said, very disappointing. Let's get to a little more of the specifics of those. Starting with, we'll do a recap of the last few games, starting with that February 28th loss at home to Northwestern. Wildcats win 68-61. Nick Martinelli with 27 points. Jameer had 24. This was another one of those just not taking care of business late in the game, especially at home, something that, like you guys mentioned, I think the Terps were significantly better at last year. The home advantage was a lot more solid. Now all of a sudden they've had issues with a Northwestern team that is good, but I think the Terps definitely on paper can beat, especially when it's a home game in the Big 10.
Yeah, I think it was kind of disappointment from Dante Scott specifically for me. He had the slow start to the season, then kind of started to pick it up, but then only scored 4 points. He scored in double digits each of the past 5 games before that. And so it was really a stinker for him, especially considering Deshaun Harris-Smith had one of his better games of the year, 14 points, 5 boards, 6 of 12 from the field. And so paired that with Jameer Young's 24 points. It was kind of a disappointment, but it was kind of, once again, Jameer Young leading the show, not much help around him.
Yeah, the biggest thing I look at is the bench points, only 5. in a game like this, winding down in conference play, especially when you have guys that are banged up, the injury bug starts to hit. It's a home game, as you mentioned, Jonas, where the team has been so successful over the past couple of years. This is a game that you've got to be able to find a way to win. And you lose by 7 to, again, a Northwestern team that's good and is playing its best basketball down the stretch. But you are above 500 at this point, have a chance to sneak into at least one bye in the conference tournament. And then to this kind of just started the spiral of where we'll talk about later with the Indiana game. And now you set yourself up having to really have a must win against Penn State this weekend to really have your best chance to make it far in this Big 10 tournament.
And I think another thing that stood out to me and has stood out all year has been just this team's complete inability to know what to do late in games. I think there's no identity for where the ball goes. I think that it naturally kind of leads to Jahmir Young three-pointer. That tends to always be the case. But one, he hasn't really been able to convert those late game threes at such a phenomenal rate for that to be the only solution. But outside of him, I don't see anyone as a real threat, especially from the three-point line late in games. And I think that's been a huge part of why they've lost all these close games, especially at home. And I think that, Brandon, you make a good point, especially. I think Dante Scott has to be that player to a certain extent for the Terps. And I think that a big reason why they've been losing so many of these games has been because the player that they need, the veteran presence that they need, who should be able to hit those shots down the stretch, has been completely non-existent. And that's been very much to their detriment. So do we have anything else on this Wildcat loss? I think this was just another disappointing one. We can go a little more into the next one, unless you guys have anything else.
Yeah, no, I think we kind of basically covered it. It's just, especially what you said down the stretch with Jahmir Young about them not really having an identity for these late game situations. All season, it's just been, hey, Jahmir, have this deep three, have this pull up mid range two, just do whatever you can to score. And I think that's been the problem.
Yeah, everybody else is scared to shoot. They're scared to shoot the basketball late in these games. You've seen Deshaun Harris-Smith just pass the ball off with 2 or 3 seconds left on the clock, and he just has no confidence in his shot right now. One more thing, you hold Bubili to 12 points in this game, and to lose by 7, something's not adding up there. Something's not adding up. The defense for this team has been great all year long. It was like that against Northwestern, but again, it's the same story with the offense.
And I think another thing also to note is that these players know how important these games are. When we were talking about this stretch late, kind of towards the end of the season, we were talking about how important these Big Ten matchups were going to be. And the players knew that. You would go into the press conference and say, we really needed to win this game. It was very important. So it also just kind of adds to how frustrating it's been that they haven't had that solution late in games. Let's move on to another one of those important games. Also, the teams knew how much a win mattered in this situation. 83-78 loss to Indiana, also at home on March 3rd. Jahmir Young, Juju Reese, this was a lot of good games. This was senior day. And what's especially weird about this was if you were watching this game early in the second half, you would say Maryland was going to run away with it. They had a 16-point lead at one point in this game. Everything was under control. The crowd was into it. And then out of nowhere, in this important of a game, for it to completely fall apart like this was even shocking for me. Having watched this team all year, I've expected some collapses at certain times, but this one was shocking even to me.
Yeah, I think it's not too out of the realm of possibilities to say it's one of the worst losses they've had this season. Given that it's senior day, you have a 16-point lead early in the second half. You need the win for Big Ten seeding entering the tournament. It would be a massive win. Just vibes at the end of the season. And I think because of the way they lost, it was absolutely brutal. I mean, the second half, once kind of the lead started to dwindle down, I was watching and I could just sense like, oh no, here we go again. They're just gonna blow this game, and you could just feel it. Indiana kept getting closer and closer, and then just ultimately took the lead. And Maryland just went ice cold in the second half, and it ultimately cost them the game.
Yeah, I think it was a 39-13 Hoosier run there in the second half, and you get outscored by 15 in the second half. And the worst thing about this, in my opinion, this was one of Maryland's better offensive outputs in conference play all year long. Shot 48% from the field, 37.5% from three. They won the turnover battle, had only 10 to Indiana's 14, and it was pretty tight in the rebounding as well. So you look at the stat sheet and you're saying, okay, this is a team that Maryland should beat, and a game that yes, it was close, but Maryland should have been on the winning side. And Indiana just caught fire in the second half. They finished the day shooting 56% from the field, shooting 44% from three. And it was just Maryland's inability to stop them from connecting on shots in the second half that was the costly error.
Yeah, Nate, you mentioned the turnovers there. One of the big things was all those turnovers, almost all those turnovers for the Terps came late in that game. And I think that was a big reason why that sudden run happened for Indiana, because not only were they scoring, they were constantly scoring off of Terps turnovers. It was so many free buckets. The defense kind of fell apart at the end completely, which again is very surprising, because I think that in a game like this where a win is so important, I guess you could to a certain extent understand if maybe the offensive output isn't there, but it was really the defense and just the passing that let them down. And I guess I'll throw a little bit of a controversial question out there. How much of that kind of is on Kevin Willard for not having the players out there to take control of the game and put it away? Because everyone knows college basketball is very unpredictable, but when you feel a run coming like that, like everyone in the building felt, because everyone knew what was happening. Once the 16-point lead was at 10, once it was at 8, everyone could feel what was happening. But I didn't feel any real adjustments from Willard. I think he kind of was just hoping his players would come back to the level they were playing in the first half, and that's not really reflective of a progressive coach, I'd say. So I was curious what you guys thought of his kind of adjustments there.
Yeah, I think the second half, that's all on Willard. Once you see that Indiana kind of getting the run, the Hoosiers really starting to dip into the lead, I think that's when you have to get your team back motivated, get them back focused, and he couldn't do that. And I think it all stems from the head coach. The players, especially in college, are going to need kind of some guidance, some coaching to really get back focused, get back into it. And I think it stems from Willard, and his kind of issues coaching has been a major reason why Maryland's had a disappointing year.
Yeah, it's safe to say he didn't put on his chiropractor hat, as John Rothstein would say, in the second half. It was bad. There's no other way to put it. It was bad. You got to figure something out there. Personally, I don't know what could have been done other than just getting your guys together and just being a leader, right? Settling the team down and just putting them in the right mindset. This team knows how to score the basketball when the timing's right. We've seen it so far this year. They've won a couple close games on the road down to the wire. You look back to that Iowa game when Jameer made a shot with under 2 seconds left that we talked about. So that could have been another one of these games where even though you let them get back into the game, you still buckle down when you need to the most. And we'll talk about that, how they did that against Penn State earlier in this year. But I don't know. It's just, you can't let that happen on your gold rush, on your senior day, your last home game of the regular season. Just can't happen.
Absolutely. Anything else on this Hoosier game, or can we start previewing? Because I think the big takeaway here, and the commentary we're making about the team after these performances, I think it's very fair to say that you can make almost the exact same points about so many of the losses. And again, I'm just going to keep coming back to it. This Xfinity Center home advantage was what beat the number one team in the country at one point last year. And for it to not only for them to have all that fuel behind them against the Hoosiers in such an important game with a 16-point lead, and for it to crumble so much, it was shocking to me. And unfortunately, it's resemblant of a team that just doesn't deserve to be in the tournament, truthfully.
Yeah, honestly, I feel like the fan base has just kind of gone to the wayside, right? Like, not saying that the fans are not showing up, because the fans are still showing up to the games. Now the students, that's all another story. But it just seems like there's a disconnect there. Last year, everybody was wanting to come to the Xfinity Center. There was multiple sellouts. This year, it's not the same. And you win basketball games, fans come. And it just, down the stretch, people just did not want to be at the games because of stuff like this.
Yeah, and I think that all started at the beginning of the season with the Davidson, UAB, and Villanova losses. They got down 1-3 early in the season, and then all of a sudden the fans are like, okay, what's going on with this team? And then, yeah, you get 3 straight wins, but it's against UMBC, South Alabama, Rider. And so I think that because they started the year so poorly, the fans never really got into it.
All right, let's talk about this Penn State game, because as much negativity as we've just spread about this team, this is actually still a relatively important game. We'll get into it a little more about Big Ten implications a little bit later, but let's just talk about this Penn State game. It's the last regular season game for the Terps. They did win this matchup last time. It was in College Park, 81-75 win. Nice little 6.9 rebound game for Kudus Wahab there from the Nittany Lions, by the way.
That's a name.
Great job from him.
Name.
But 28 points for Jameer. This was just another example of one of those games where if Jameer has an excellent game, they can win. I guess what big takeaways do you take from that win that Maryland has to implement in this one if they can get another win against the Nittany Lions?
I think for me, the biggest thing is that while it was a great win, you still only had Jameer and Juju really do anything. They had 28 and 24, the 81 points. Dante Scott shot 2 of 11, Jordan Geronimo 2 of 8, Deshaun Harris-Smith 7 points. So I think, especially because they're going to be on the road, they're going to need other scores besides Jameer, even besides Juju. Because honestly, can we bank on Juju scoring 24 points in 41 minutes again? Probably not. And so they're going to need other guys to score. And so I think that also because of how long ago it was in the season, I'm not really sure how much you can take away from it for either side.
I think for me, the biggest thing is the rebounds. You look at Maryland's advantage, 53 rebounds to Penn State's 31. And Dante Scott, Juju Reese combined for 25 of those 53. So if Maryland can control the glass, I think this is going to be a tight game. If Penn State is able to win in that category with the home field advantage, and you look back to this game last year in State College, it was a buzzer beater. Penn State won at the last possible second. It's been nail-biting these last couple matchups between these teams. So it's going to be those little things. Can you get the offensive rebounds? Can you limit the turnover battle? Maryland lost the turnover battle in this game back in December and still won the game in overtime. So I think those are going to be the two biggest things.
Yeah, and Brandon, I want to harp on another point you make, which is there have been too many of these games where it seems like the only players showing up for the Terps are Jameer and Juju. I guess we point to Dante as being the next option, but say that those two have just an average game. If they win this one, who do you think is that third star that steps up? Because DHS did have a game-stealing bucket in this one. Dante is, in theory, the third scorer, at least on average. That's kind of been the case all season. So who kind of fits in there if they're going to win?
I think DHS is going to have a big game, especially because Kanye Clary, Penn State's leading scorer in that first matchup, is no longer with the team. He was dismissed in early February, I believe. And so that's a big guard that's going to be missing for the Nittany Lions. And so I think DHS is going to have to take advantage of it. He's going to have one of his better games of the year. What I want to see is if he can make even a couple threes, that's a big spot, even not for this year, but for next season, to get him kind of rolling as this season concludes, just to give him confidence as next year begins. I just think that this is going to have to be a big DHS game.
All right, let's do a little Big Ten tournament preview here, because this Penn State game actually has significant implications on where Maryland's going to land in terms of seeding. Now, if they do beat Penn State, there's a very good chance that they can play Michigan in the first round, which would be a significant advantage for them also because they'd kind of find themselves on the opposite half of a lot of good teams, including Purdue up there on the top. We can look at the other ones more specifically, but just that Michigan matchup, I think it's pretty fair to say that is probably the best chance the Terps have at winning their first round matchup.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, Michigan has been clearly the worst team in the conference. I mean, Maryland tied with Rutgers right now for the second worst, and then Ohio State, Penn State just a game above them. So it's kind of just been a logjam in between and kind of the middle of the Big Ten standings. Then Michigan has just kind of coasted at the bottom for the entire season. And so I think it's crucial for Maryland to get that spot to face Michigan and avoid even needing to face Penn State again or Rutgers again.
And then I guess in terms of specifics, we don't know who they would play kind of in that second round, but we do know if they would fall in that bottom half of the tournament, the bigger seeds there would be Illinois and Nebraska most likely. I can pull up those results in a sec, but how from those two teams, Illinois obviously a very strong team, 12th in the country. What do you see in those matchups, and what do the Terps kind of have to do if they want something there against those better teams?
Yeah, I think for me, honestly, if I'm going to pick between the two that I'd rather face, I think at this point in the year, I'd rather face Illinois if I'm Maryland. I think you know what they have in Terrence Shannon and Coleman Hawkins. And a team that, yes, Maryland lost to them at home a couple weeks back, beat them on the road, given that was a while ago. But the star power, I feel like, is something that is a blessing and a curse for a team like Illinois, because if their stars are on, they're on, and they're going to win a lot of their games. If they're even the slightest bit off and Maryland can continue its top 10 in the country defensive play, then we can start talking about maybe Maryland riding out that game and Illinois being in some trouble. And remember, at this point in the season, it's win or go home for Maryland. They've got literally nothing to lose at this point. If they only make the NCAA tournament, if they win the Big 10 tournament. So I think they're going to upset one team. That's going to be my bold prediction. They're going to upset one of these higher seeds. And I think it could be Illinois. In terms of what they'd have to do that upset, I think, like I said, limiting the stars. Also, the freshmen have to show up. Deshaun Harris-Smith, Jamie Kaiser Jr., even if Jonathan Lamoth were to get in there for a couple minutes here or there, I think those two guys, Kaiser and Harris-Smith, need to at least hit a 3 or 2 each just to have everybody settle into the game. And I mentioned this earlier, but the bench is going to be huge. If Juju Reese gets into foul trouble, Talon Swanton-Roger has to come in and not get in foul trouble himself, something that's been a struggle for him. But also Jahari Long, he's been a sharpshooter at some times for Maryland so far this year. He had a really good stretch at the end of January, beginning of February. If he can settle back into that, take some pressure off of everybody else in the starting lineup, this Maryland team is good. And they have a chance to make a little bit of noise here in Minneapolis.
You know, it's funny to me how you said you'd rather see Illinois, because I definitely would rather see Nebraska if I'm Maryland. Maryland already beat Nebraska by 22 points at home in the regular season. Nebraska's 1-8 in the conference when they're not at home. I just think they're a completely different team away from home. I mean, Illinois has 4 double-digit scores. Terrence Shannon with 21. He's going to be playing. Marcus Domask with 16. I just think that Illinois is definitely more of a capable threat. And Nebraska away, I think, is a very different team. And that proved when Maryland beat them by over 20 points at home. So I think if I'm Maryland, they are definitely the team I'd rather face.
For all my DMV Hoops fans, Nate and Brandon tend to disagree a lot, so we're just seeing another one of those examples. I'm
trying to keep my composure. I'm trying to keep my composure here.
We're live.
All I will say is that the game is not in College Park. It is at a neutral site. So I don't think you can really play into the away from home argument right there.
I mean, even if we're just talking about that, Nebraska is 11-9 this season away from home, so that includes neutral sites.
It's a winning record.
They're a 500 team. Illinois away from home is 7-5, so a little bit better. So just saying.
That's two more wins and 2 more wins, Brandon.
Well, Illinois also, as you said, Nate, is ranked, and Nebraska is not. They don't just rank these teams randomly, Nate. There's a reason behind that.
I laid out my argument.
I'm gonna calm us down for a sec. Quickly, just once again, make sure to follow and like on our Twitter and YouTube. It is Believe in Wizards for both. I'm just gonna keep plugging. Subscribe, like, do all that stuff. It helps Matt out a lot. So make sure to do that. Quickly, just one more thing about this. Another thing to note: if they would play Nebraska, it would be Nebraska's first game of the tournament. If they would play Illinois, it would most likely be Illinois' second game of the tournament. So a big thing to note here, if these scenarios actually do happen, is Maryland would be coming in with some kind of momentum, probably more momentum than the other teams that they're playing. So an upset waiting to happen, I don't think it's as much out of the realm of possibility as just one of these teams, facing one of these teams at a neutral site on a certain day, because I think that the momentum will kind of play a bigger part of that than maybe it does in just a regular game. Anything else of note? I guess we can have a quick conversation about just the Big 10 tournament. Purdue is very much the favorites here. I think that it's definitely their tournament to lose, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. I really don't see a scenario where Purdue doesn't win it again.
Yeah, any dark horses outside of Maryland?
Michigan State, just because of Tom Izzo. You can never doubt them. I'd say the experience there definitely helps. Maybe Northwestern. Illinois, I'd say I'd go Purdue, Illinois, Michigan State as my top 3 in the tournament.
I really like what Northwestern could do in this tournament down the stretch. I think if there's a dark horse team that's not in the top 2 or 3, Northwestern's sitting right there at 4th in the conference right now. They could drop down to 5th potentially, which would get them out of the double bye range. But I think if they were to fall in the last game of the regular season and slide into just a single bye, that they could be a team that, with riding that momentum that you mentioned, Jonas, could make some noise in the semifinals and the championship.
That was pretty solid analysis there, Nate. Outside of the top 3, the 4 seed probably has a pretty good chance. Sorry. All right.
I gave an actual dark horse with Michigan State. I like that to be.
I like Michigan State, but I actually also really like Northwestern. I think that I would argue they probably have a better chance than Nebraska does. So I think it's a good take too. All right, let's move on to our segments a little bit. We've got a ton of stuff to recap with this team. We can go into specifics a little more. The one thing we've been hitting on a lot that definitely needs some coverage is this freshman class, because I think when we were looking at all these previews, all these predictions, what's going to happen with this team this year, the big reason why so many reporters and analysts said that they might have a chance is because of this freshman class. Deshaun Harris-Smith, Jamie Kaiser, and Lamoth. They were very exciting going into it, and I can pretty fairly say that all 3 have been extremely disappointing this year. I can give some stats here. Harris-Smith has had by far the most game time. He's averaging about 30 minutes a game, 7 points per game. He's only shooting 16% from 3. And Lamoth and Kaiser have had real struggles getting on the court at all. Lamoth only averages 7 minutes a game, Kaiser 20. Lamoth is averaging less than a point a game, and Kaiser's averaging 4. From all 3 of these, I guess you can frame them a lot of different ways. Who has been the most disappointing to you guys?
For me, I think it has to be Jamie Kaiser Jr., considering that his kind of calling card was 3-and-D, and his 3-point percentage is 24.8%. And that's also his field goal percentage, because he just does not really shoot 2s, because again, his calling card is 3s. And considering that he's played in 30 games this season, and only scoring 4 points a night, I think it's a big concern. I think that the beginning of the season, it's okay. He's rusty. He's a freshman. Let him get his feet settled. His feet have not gotten settled at all this season. And it's just been a disappointment, because you go in knowing that he's going to get these open looks and he's not converting them. If he just makes 3 of these open looks a game, I think the season goes a completely different way.
I totally agree.
Yeah,
Nate?
Yeah, I definitely agree, Brandon. Kaiser has been disappointing. And even if he get that 3-point percentage up to maybe 28, it's a completely different story right now. But I think for me, it's DHS. And whether it's fair or not to say the expectation was he'd shoot the ball better, I'm going to leave that up to everybody else to decide. But the point of the matter is he's shooting 37% from the field, 16.5% from 3, and 60% from the line. For a guy that is supposed to be this star-studded backcourt with Jahmir Young, he was supposed to come in and settle in right away, and he's just really struggled shooting the basketball, especially at the beginning of the year in non-conference plays. I feel like he's gotten much better as the season's gone on, which is a good thing and good for development purposes. But when you have a guy starting right away, you just can't have him have the struggles that he had. And I feel like the pressure just mounted. It was too much for DHS to handle at the beginning, and he stayed in the starting lineup every single game for just way too long, in my opinion. I think if he settled into a 6-man role, maybe at the start of conference play, maybe give Jahari Long more minutes in the early January, I think this is going to be a little bit different of a argument. But yeah, I think if DHS shoots the ball better, he's not in this conversation.
So there's actually a lot of things you say there, Nate, that I want to hit on. First of all, this combination of DHS and Jahmir Young, I think there's 2 things to note. One, obviously it's been disappointing, but also it just doesn't really work, because I think if you watch DHS in high school, a big part of why he worked so well was because he was such a physical presence, and because he brought the ball up the floor and he was constantly attacking, and he also had that shooting in him. We don't see that at all, because Jahmir Young, to a certain extent, is the focal point of this offense, and he starts everything. And like you said, Brandon, DHS doesn't have a good enough 3-point shooting percentage to be able to kind of play as an off-ball shooting guard. So he really just has kind of not a very detailed role in this offense. It's very apparent, and he's just kind of struggled to kind of implement his game. We haven't seen him take over with his physicality because anything in the post is mostly Juju, and then if not Dante, like he's not one of the bigger guys on the team. So he just really hasn't been able to find his specific approach of attacking the basket. That's been very much to his detriment. And I think that I don't know where the solution is there, because I think that Willard has also very much struggled to put in any of these guys in their role that they see fit. Like Brandon, I think it made a lot of sense. Jamie Kaiser is a 3-and-D guy. Let's throw him in there off the bench. We know what his role could be, but it just wasn't working, and Willard didn't really adjust that much. We didn't see a different role for him. DHS was kind of always slotted in there, like, he's our best freshman. We've got to see him play. Seemed pretty simple, but that wasn't working. But I'm going to hit on one thing. Lamoth just did not see the court this year at all. And I think that there's either two issues with that. One, he was so significantly disappointing in practice that he didn't deserve to play at all, which is a very bad thing. Or even worse, Willard just had no trust in him and didn't want to play him because he was worried about losing, which at some points in the season, I thought there has to be a better option. I mean, I saw him just as I kind of made this joke to a certain extent. He's a great passer, but he does facilitate offense relatively well. He seems relatively athletic and not like a terrible defender. It just seems so strange to me that he saw none of the court when he was such an exciting freshman coming into the class. It's just very strange to me.
Yeah, he's played 9 minutes since January 11th. That's not a lot. He scored 10 points against Alcorn State. He scored 2 points the rest of the season. So he, like you said, Jonas, he just has not been getting playing time. And it's a problem because I remember how hyped we were when all three of them were coming in. We thought this was one of the better freshman classes in the country. And it just, for each of their own purposes, they've each been a letdown. And again, that's kind of why the season has been such a letdown.
Yeah, for me, my last point, if you're going to sit Lamoth the way you sat him, I feel like you have to take the same approach with DHS and Jamie Kaiser Jr. Give them some time to settle in, or you go vice versa. If you're going to throw them all into the fire, you got to throw all three of them. You can't start two and then start developing the other one in practice. You got to throw all three of them into the fire. And I feel like I mentioned this earlier, but it was unfair to put that much pressure on Deshaun Harris-Smith to be your everyday shooting guard and to have Jamie Kaiser Jr. be your sixth man off the bench for a majority of the season, where Jonathan Lamoth was settling in, getting into some games late in non-conference play, and then not seeing the court at all the last 2 months.
I think a lot of this is hindsight too, with just like the integration of the players. Obviously, we look back at it, we see, you could attribute a lot of this also to just the fact that the team as a whole hasn't been that impressive, and it's hard for everyone to flourish when the situation as a whole just is pretty negative. So plus, like, when we look at these players, there have been very short spurts where they've played like the players we were expecting. I think DHS has shown that capability. I think even to a certain extent, like when Kaiser is on and when he is shooting well, he fits that role perfectly. And he is exactly like what you expect from a player like that, because his physical presence is good enough to play in this league. So at their best, they're good. It's just consistency has been a huge issue, and just nothing, and it hasn't been solved all year. Like you said, no one is improving consistently, maybe DHS to the most, but especially Lamoth and Kaiser, they've completely flatlined all year. And I think it's to a certain extent a testament of Willard's approach, and maybe definitely a significant negative from that perspective.
One thing I want to touch on before we hop into this next topic, how big of it was for Ian Martinez to leave, and then DHS has to slot in and be this everyday starter. If Ian Martinez is on the roster right now and not at Utah State, he's getting the everyday nod, and Deshaun Harris-Smith is coming off the bench. All these freshmen are in the same sort of class where they're not having to start every day. But with the loss of Martinez, that's what kind of shifted this roster construction to the way we've seen it play out this year.
Absolutely. And also, I think it's kind of a funny joke because, again, for all those, we have a few inside jokes we're tapping into here. So for the listeners, I was a huge Ian Martinez fan last year, partly out of, for comedic purposes, but also partly because I thought he was a very good player. When he left, I thought it was going to be an impact, but I didn't see this playing out the way it did. To have three players coming in that can't fulfill that role. And you're right, he would have been huge. I think that even having one player that is starter material, he was a starter on a tournament team last year. That's all they needed. They truthfully, all they needed was another starter level player to fill out a starting five that could genuinely compete week to week. They were not able to do that all year, and they were missing another starter. So that's a great point there. I think we've definitely hit on the Willard stuff enough, so we can just go straight to the Mike Jones stuff, unless you guys have any more Willard commentary, maybe anything like that. All right. Mike Jones leaving. It's another assistant coach, this time going to Old Dominion for the head coaching job. This is another, I guess, something to point out. Tony Skinn leaving, Bill Meyer leaving, now Mike Jones. I know we've had some outside of content conversations about this assistant coaching staff. Not only is it maybe not super impressive in terms of developing players, but also it's had a crazy amount of turnover in the last few years. So how much do you think that's really affecting player development and also just kind of the organization as a whole right now, the program as a whole?
Yeah, I think it's definitely a negative, considering that, let's be honest, like none of these assistants are like going to change the world. Like they're not these top end, high level, oh my God, assistants you have to keep. Like they're the next big great thing. And so the fact that that's now 3 in the past 2 years under Willard, I think it's a problem that for whatever reason, like, yes, they're leaving for head coaching jobs, but Kevin, you still got to try and keep them. Like it hurts your program when you have so much turnaround. Like when you have these 3 freshmen that come in and all of a sudden they have a new assistant coach, it just creates so much turnaround and program kind of negative air around it. And I just think it's really a bad look.
I'm going to give some leeway on this because you look at where these guys are going.
We need some positivity, Nate. We need any positivity, so please do.
Tony Skinn goes to his alma mater, George Mason. Mike Jones goes to his alma mater in Old Dominion. It's not like these guys are going to take random jobs. It just so happens the timing is their alma mater has an opening and they are top assistants at one of the top tier basketball programs in the country, and they're getting poached back to their alma mater. I don't think it's anything that Kevin Willard is not being able to retain these guys. It's because the coaches have dreamed of one day coaching at the school they played for, whenever that was. So I think it's really just a culmination of that more than anything else.
But and also we can keep this relevant to the DMV hoops thing, because I think this is probably the most relevant part of it. Mike Jones and Tony Skinn were very, very crucial to this Kevin Willard plan of bringing in the local talent. Now you have both of them gone within 2 years. I think that probably throws a huge wrench into the local recruiting part of it because, you know, as we said, like in terms of adjustments and maybe player improvement at the college level, maybe this assistant coach group of mostly like local high school experienced coaches maybe wasn't the best fit, but they were very valuable for getting players like Juju Reese or anyone that you want in the local area, right? Now you don't have that as much anymore. So that's going to be a very difficult issue, because I think when we had this Willard outlook and like, how is he going to impact this team? How is he going to bring Maryland men's basketball back? A big part of that was local recruiting. Now I think this throws a huge wrench into that conversation. And I don't know if necessarily Willard's going to be able to pick up the slack from Mike Jones. Is a huge name in this area. He is a significant deal. It's a huge loss for this team.
Yeah, because the thing kind of that held Mark Turgeon back his entire tenure with Maryland was he couldn't recruit at the local level. And now we're going to see if it's going to be the same thing with Kevin Willard. He did good in the last cycle. He got Derek Queen, but now that he has 2 assistants that were huge, like you said, Jonas, leave, it can create a problem. And I'm just very curious as to how it's going to play out.
All right. So this recap of Maryland's men's basketball has been, I will not lie, very, very negative. More or less, it's been a pretty disappointing season. So I'm going to end it with this. I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit, but I'll have my answer first. I want a positive from each one of you. One takeaway that Terps fans should be very satisfied with. I will go first. Juju Reese has had a good year this year. I think that there have been a lot of question marks around him. I think that when he started here, I think that with all the stars he had coming out of recruiting, I think it was like, oh, this guy's disappointing. He's not big enough. He's not a physical enough presence. He gets rebounds. He gets points. He has been consistently their number 2 scorer behind Jameer, which I don't think everyone was expecting going into this year. I think he will. I'm not sure. I think he stays. I'm not exactly sure. It'll be close. So, I mean, this could probably end up being a negative if he goes. But if he stays, I think we do have a very solid center.
Your real positive outlook kind of took a turn there towards the end. So,
well, the transfer portal is the scariest thing in college athletics right now. Yeah. So.
Jonas has no idea whether.
What do we think about that positive though? What do we think about that positive though?
I think it's good. I think it's fair. It's also kind of the obvious one. So I'm going to go. So last year in the tournament, Penn State was a 10th seed, and they went to the championship game. That could be Maryland. So
I like this.
If they somehow do that, just give the fans just a little bit of hope towards the end of the season. And I think it could honestly give the players, especially the freshmen, confidence enter next year. Seeing them play these high-level games when it matters, I think if they play well in the tournament, that could really do wonders at the beginning of next year.
All right. And then for me, it's got to be you have another program-defining top-tier caliber guard in Jahmir Young. And the legacy that he's going to leave, I mean, there's been so many great point guards, right? Anthony Cowan Jr., Melo Trimble. You just look at the other guys. Right. You can go down the list of so many names that just will stick in your mind forever if you're a Maryland basketball fan. And Jahmir Young has solidified himself in that category. If they were to retire the number one, I know it's trouble to do with all the guys that share it, but Jahmir Young definitely did enough with this program to deserve to be in the rafters. And it's going to be sad to see him go. He played such a vital role on this team the last 2 years. The kid from Upper Marlboro coming back home to play for Maryland, and a big reason why Maryland made the tournament last year, and a big reason why this team is where it is right now.
Yeah, it's almost bittersweet in a way, Nate, because like you said, it's a really great story. The local kid coming from Charlotte and putting on these kind of performances in the Big Ten right away. I mean, he was scoring over 20 points as soon as he got to Maryland. It's almost bittersweet because he is a tournament level point guard that if he had maybe the surrounding cast that a lot of these other guys did, he could have made maybe more of an impact, because I think that with all those names, the number one thing that comes back to bite them is the tournament success. And Jahmir didn't even have that opportunity because he didn't have a supporting cast that could even get him there. All right, so that does it for this episode. We kind of kept it pretty short, try to keep it tight. We don't have as much live experience as Mr. Matt Moderno, so we're going to keep it tight. But thank you, Brandon and Nate, for joining me. It was great. It was a good time, right, guys?
Yeah, had a great time.
Yeah, thank you, Jonas.
Also, shout out Brendan Weissel in the chat. We're
oh, wow. Brendan's in the chat.
Yeah.
Wait, he's
Brendan
in the chat?
is in the chat. Yeah,
oh, I see that.
I can see that. I'm not really understanding StreamYard that much. One more time, we are presented by BetOnline. BetOnline continues to be your number one source for all your basketball wagering needs, including pro and college hoops throughout the year. With up-to-minute odds, stats, and trends, you can follow your favorite team path to the playoffs with in-game live betting, contests, and all your best player props. Experience the world's best wagering platform anytime from your desktop or your mobile device. Head to BetOnline today to be part of the team. And remember to use code BELIEVE for your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. BetOnline, the game starts here. Be sure to follow us all on Twitter. It's bschwartzberg03 for Brandon, Nate Schwartz _ for Nate. I am at Jonas Evans TV. And of course, follow Laura on Twitter as well. I don't have her Twitter memorized, but go follow her. Follow BELIEVE on Twitter, like, subscribe, do all those things. Thank you so much for listening. Matt will be back on the airwaves next week. We'll see you guys.